I'm going to be presenting on the need for evidence-based policymaking on the creative industries. So what are creative industries? Not going to dwell much on the definitions. Our honorable professor has already told us the difference between creative and cultural industries, and he has explained the definitions of the two. So I'll just quote a definition by UNESCO, who defines cultural and creative industries as sectors of organized, and I'll underline organized there, activity, whose principal purpose is the production or reproduction, promotion, distribution, and or commercialization, I'll underline commercialization, of goods, services, and activities of a cultural, artistic, or heritage-related nature. So I've underlined commercialization and organized. So here we are talking about humanity, but we are focusing more on the commercialization. It's not art for art's sake. It's not creativity for creativity's sake. It's creativity for what? For dollars. We have our own African Union's Plan of Action on the cultural and creative industries in Africa, 2008 there, but I think it started as the Dakar Plan of Action, and then it became the Nairobi Plan of Action, 2005, and 2008, it was readopted in Algiers. And the definition, again, which they use is almost similar to, in fact, it's the same as the UNESCO definition. So they are subscribing to the UNESCO definition, but there are also other definitions, like the one that I've just quoted there by the DCMS UK. And you will notice that most of the time when people are talking about creative industries, they are referring to these two definitions. And why creative industries? We are talking about policy making specifically for creative industries. Since 2000, there has been a significant increase in world trade of cultural products, which supports the argument that cultural industries could open the door for African economies to participate effectively in the world market. So Patrick and his team, and his colleagues and partners, they looked at this school of thought and said, definitely, something of this nature, it requires policy. What is not so good, however, is that the relatively marginal contribution of Africa. So according to the Creative Economy report published by UNCTAD in 2008, Africa was reported to be contributing less than 1% to the world export of cultural goods. Less than 1%. It's not clear, it could be 0.1. It could be 0.5, but they are saying it's less than 1%, less than 1%. If you are a parent and you are paying fees for your child, and they bring you a report with less than 1%, then you know you are in trouble. According to Dr. Mbaye, Jenny Mbaye, who is actually here with us, talent alone is not sufficient to build a competitive creative economy and creative industry. So someone was saying artists are born. And the doctor is saying, no, talent alone is not enough when we are talking about industry, right? There must be institutional as well as political intervention. We need to have support. So we can have talent, but we will not eat talent. During the good old days in Zimbabwe, our president used to say, so Blair, you keep your England, and I keep my Zimbabwe. And we as the grass would always say, but look, we don't eat sovereignty. Comrades, we can't allow him to keep his England because, We don't eat sovereignty. How are African countries performing in the creative industries? So unlike the professor who was giving us a global analysis of performance of different countries in creative industries, my research or my presentation is focusing more closer home. According to that source there that I have quoted, because I don't want people to start asking me questions, where are you getting this information from? In 2014, the Nigerian government released data for the first time showing that Nollywood, the film industry in Nigeria, is a 3.3 billion worth sector, with around 1,844 movies produced in 2013 alone. That's Nollywood, eh? In spite of the sharp increase of African export of creative goods, actually the less than 1% is being described as a sharp increase. African creative products are still underrepresented in world markets. They are only, also this time around, UNCTAD decided to be very daring. They are only 0.36% and 0.54% respectively. That was in 2010. I think they gathered courage there to actually give us the figures. Creative industries in South Africa, closer home again, within the same region. In 2014, according to some early mapping of the sector, South Africa's creative economy contributed over 90.5 billion rands to the economy, to the national economy, or around 2.9% of the GDP in 2013 and 2014, exceeding, for example, the contribution of agriculture to the GDP, which was 2.2%. That's according to that source. I don't know who wrote that. Could be lies, I'm not sure. Okay, that's according to that source. So in my own country, and I'm happy that as I'm speaking, the executive director of our National Arts Council is here in our midst, and say, in our own country, in the preface of a research report produced by the Culture Fund of Zimbabwe Trust with support from UNESCO's IFCD in 2012, it is noted that in Zimbabwe, the cultural industry has over the past few years emerged as a source of income, employment, and a tool to assert the people's national identity. The cultural industry contributes immensely in attracting tourist inflows and building the country's image. However, as you can see, no concrete figures and statistics were given to support that assertion. According to the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, ZIPA, the creative industries contribute modestly to the Zambian economy. The study reports that they accounted for 2.5% of the total employment in 2010, and it further states that 0.04% of exports and 1% of imports were attributed, total imports for the country were attributed to the creative industry, and that was in 2010, 8 years ago. I'm sure things have changed now. So it is, at this moment, I just want to make it clear that it is crucial to note that creative industry policy making is different from cultural policy making, because when we talk about cultural policy, we are talking about our culture, our humanity, our Ubuntuism, not necessarily commercialization. But when we talk about creative industry, we are talking about industry, commercialization of creativity. And we are not just focusing on the arts, but we are also looking at the whole value chain and the services and activities around the value chain, such as marketing, your graphic designing and things along those lines. In my opinion, the creative industries deserve the production of specific national creative industry policy, as it is difficult to comprehensively and adequately articulate such policy interventions in a national culture policy without making the document so huge and probably useless. So when we have our own national cultural policy, it is always good to then have, say, a national book policy, a national cultural industries policy, which really speak to the specific needs of the industry. I imagine such a policy would be a comprehensive, coherent, action-oriented, evidence-based, and long-term industrial policy framework for the creative industry. The policy will cover critical issues such as the need for adequate funding of creative industries, capacity building, and markets development, etc. You know most of those issues. And as some of the strategic goals and overall priorities for the creative industries. So the creative industries in Africa, they have a very high potential to contribute towards social and economic development. Those are characteristics of the creative industry. But mostly, they exist as informal sector. One writer observes, moreover, the lack of a suitable support system to back the development of creative industries has confined them to take place mostly in the informal sector. So if you check in our countries, mostly in Southern Africa, our creative industries exist mostly as SMEs, small to medium enterprises, and in most cases, sole traders, one-man band. If the person dies with the company, with the enterprise. The use of digital technologies is also growing in the creative industries with a whole range of emerging tech hubs that foster innovation in South Africa and Zimbabwe and Mozambique, even here in Namibia, I'm sure they are there. The region is also quickly embracing, that's the Southern African region, quickly embracing new ways of content sharing and distribution. So it means the uptake of technology is generally improving. But the biggest culprit that we have to deal with is the challenge around internet and connectivity. Because internet prices continue to be very high, they remain high, and even accessibility on its own, it's still a huge challenge on the continent and in the region. So the general challenge is there. You have your lack of funding, especially public funding. So creative industries, in most cases, they are still treated like the stepdaughter. They are not getting part of the share. The government will always say that they are priorities. And unfortunately, creative industries, even if we preach that they play, you know, they are the new gold. But are the governments and the policymakers convinced? Because they continue to sideline them in terms of investment. We still have limited you can read through them, I think because of time. Then I have those 4 questions there for our governments. Are our governments fully aware, because they are the major stakeholder in policymaking, are they fully aware of the operational environment of the creative industries on our continent? Are they fully aware and fully convinced, what I was just saying now, of the potential that creative industries have in promoting and enhancing sustainable development? Are our governments aware of the myriad of challenges faced by creative industries? And are our policies responding to these issues? When we talk about policy, we are not talking about a document which has been written by, in flowery language by an expert, which is kept in one of the old cupboards at the ministry, which the artist doesn't have access to. I am talking about policy as a statement of government and as action of government, what they are currently doing, what they are supporting, and beyond implementation, talking about monitoring and evaluation of the implementation of such policy. So now I move to evidence-based policy there. It places the best available evidence from different sources at the heart of policymaking. It makes explicit what is known through scientific evidence and, importantly, what is not known, but not just through scientific evidence, as you are going to see. It requires an evidence base at all stages in the policymaking cycle. So from agenda setting, we want evidence. What is informing your agenda? Comrade Chair, from the Namibian Arts Council, what is informing your agenda here? Where is the evidence? Why do we need cultural policy? Do we need creative industry policy? That's the agenda, right? And we are going to formulation of the policy, the implementation. Where do we need to concentrate on? What do we need to hammer on? Development of markets, we are looking at, do we have evidence that the problem is lack of markets? Do we have evidence that the problem is capacity? Do we have evidence? Because when we have such kind of evidence, then it informs the implementation. Where are we going to be concentrating on? Where are we going to put the dollars? Where are we going to create institutions and support? Policy should be, okay, so it tends to be less developed in developing countries. And evidence influences the policy-making process at each stage. I've said that. However, different evidence and different mechanisms may be required. I will explain that later. In the process, policymakers need to understand the value of evidence. So we do have the evidence. But the major stakeholder in policymaking, who is our government, does he understand the value of the evidence that we have to become more informed as to what evidence is available and to know how to gain access to it and be able to critically appraise it. You are going to notice that most of our governments, for example, they are not currently collecting cultural statistics. So very few national statistics agents are collecting cultural statistics. But believe you me, they are collecting statistics about HIV. They are collecting statistics about all other developmental issues except for culture. And to me, it's a major question, does it hurt to just add 3 items in the national census so that we also get maybe to appreciate cultural consumption, you know, all those issues. When it comes to culture, we have to commission separate research but we already have institutions which we are not using. And it takes me back to the questions that I was asking. Are we pretenders? Because we are saying this is the new gold, but we don't want to invest in it. So what is the evidence that I'm talking about? You have expert knowledge, that's from the UK. Expert knowledge, published research, existing research, stakeholder consultations, previous policy evaluations, outcomes from consultations. Because you'll notice that in some cases, the public will be consulted. But then the results of the consultations are not paid attention to. So why are we having the consultation? Evidence tends, in most cases, to be portrayed as an apolitical, neutral, and objective policy tool. According to theorists, they always tell you that, you know, you need evidence-based policy, evidence, evidence, when you have evidence. But does it really mean that when we have evidence, we are going to have evidence-based policy? First, I'll address one issue that is really problematic. The question of who collects the evidence for creative industry policymaking is very critical. So if evidence is just being collected by civil society, and usually in the traditional form, especially in my country, of my understanding or misconception of civil society, it means enemy of government. So will they trust evidence that is coming from your number one enemy? So civil society, we better be careful how we want to be recognized and defined. Do we want to say, yes, this is my position, but I'm your partner? Or we will say, this is my position and I'm your enemy? Evidence is usually collected by 2 different types of institutions. You have the government and you have non-governmental. So you have your national arts councils creating the national statistics agencies, but you have the independent ones. For example, researchers, independent researchers like myself, evaluators, funders, think tanks, and also funders. I've worked so far on 2 very interesting research projects. One, Lavinia, I'm breaking the rules, I'm sorry. Please don't withhold my payment, my last payment because of this. I have done a research project by the British Council in 6 African countries, in Southern Africa. And you know, the kind of information that we are getting from that study, you will be shocked. And I kept asking, Lavinia, are you going to share this information with our governments? Because they may not have money to commission a study of such magnitude. But surely they will benefit from the information. But the major question now is, do they trust such kind of a source? would they want to say, okay, this study was commissioned by the British Council, and now it's being used by our own ministry? In my opinion, whatever source of evidence used, it should design a systematic way of collecting evidence that places you and me, the creators and creative enterprises, at the center of data gathering. We don't want people to speak about us before they consult us, because we are the best people. We know exactly what we need in this industry. Types of evidence, you have your research papers, your conference, whatnot, but gathering of evidence should also promote intersectoral collaborations. So a comprehensive policy will, after consulting with the stakeholders, okay, the major stakeholders, the artists, the creative enterprise owners, they should also consult other departments, because we are talking about dollars here. So we need to know, for example, what is going on with the Trade and Commerce department. We need to know the education, tourism, and so when we are moving towards evidence-based policymaking, we are not just working with evidence that is in the arts and culture sector, but we are also looking at evidence from other sectors that is directly impacting on our existence as the creative industries. What evidence exists in our countries? So we all know this. Cultural statistics. Usually the government will say, where are your statistics? You are contributing, yes, but to what extent? You cannot convince the politician by just saying, of late we've been contributing significantly towards employment. And to what extent? Lots of women and youths are employed. Proof. They want proof. And we have a missing link there, statistics, but it's not the only form of evidence. I'm just giving examples. So when you have your evidence, is it just a matter of presenting the evidence to policymakers? And when you present your evidence to policymakers, as experts, you need to engage with the policy process that exists, not the one we wish existed. I will remind my director, Mr. Moyo, about a certain scenario that once happened in Zimbabwe in 2013. Myself and my radical friend, we call ourselves the mainstream civil society. So, to begin with, we had not been invited by the National Arts Council to a national arts and culture endeavor. We were not invited, and we didn't have an opportunity to speak. But we still attended anyway. So they found us there, and they said, watch out for those people. They have something that they want to smuggle into this meeting. We said, okay, watch out for us. So day one, relaxed. Day two, a colleague got an opportunity to speak, and we shot in the presence of everyone. Then we actually presented our idea of the creative civil society, and before we know it, we had the buy-in of the government. We had to smuggle ourselves into it. I know he's the new director, and you will be inviting us, Mr. Moyo, you will be inviting us all the time. To identify when and how to, so we also need to be very clear so that we identify when and how to contribute evidence. That's what I was explaining there. When and how. So if you are conducting research, for example, right from the beginning, even if the government doesn't have money and you are a creative civil society organization, you let them know that there is this study that we are implementing, so you let them know that there is this work that you are doing, and you are seeking to contribute to the efforts of the government. And when the study is done, you verify your data, you verify your information, and you also invite them again to the official launch of the findings. Let them see the findings so that you have their buy-in. Whenever they are making policy, they will remember that there is a certain study that was conducted by so and so, and so the other issue is also about capacity. Sometimes the government doesn't do it because, most of the people at the top in the ministries, they are political appointees. Some of them are not really, actively engaged in this sector. So because of that, we don't need to shun them away. We need to school them about ourselves. Otherwise, they will make policies that are ignorant to issues that really affect us. Advocate for public funding of research to assist in policy making. So push the government, because sometimes it's not always easy, like I said, for them to use evidence from other sources. So advocate for them to fund research and say, please, we need to do this mapping. We need to do an economic impact study of creative industries so that they own it because they have commissioned it. At another level, you should also process any evidence that you have. There is that huge book that we have in our bags. Can I have a copy? Something like this. That if the politician is going through the 5 pages, they will just say, oh, okay, so this is what is happening. Okay, all right. So they have an understanding. So after that, we need the huge document and we need the summary. So we process the evidence so that it becomes user-friendly. So do we have standards, for example, by which we can demonstrate rigor when we are undertaking qualitative research? Do we have guidelines for accepted consensus about the standards? What I was talking about, that whenever you are conducting even your own private study, you need the buy-in of the government, so that of policymakers, not just government, even stakeholders. I was chatting with Lavinia when we were doing our study, the British Council study. By the way, Patrick was one of our researchers. So Namibia, you are safe. Okay. So when we're doing that study, I told them that after everything has been done, we still have to go back to the people to validate this. Because as long as they don't validate it, ownership will become an issue. So the evidence will be trashed. People will just say, I don't know about it. And in Zambia, we were working with someone from the National Arts Council. We don't know anything about it. You need to find ways that whatever resource that you have invested in creating evidence does not just go in vain. So you create evidence that is acceptable, that people will say, yes, we own this, we did this, and we recognize it. We are ready to make use of it. So data sources also must be reliable. If you are conducting maybe research and you're collecting data, make sure the sources that you are approaching are also reliable. Sometimes this whole issue of trashing of evidence comes not because the government is not clever, but they're saying, look at your sources. You've just been quoting newspapers and newspapers and newspapers. Have you spoken to opinion leaders? Have you looked at previous studies conducted on the same subject? Have you gone to consult people who are actually doing the work, or you just sat and did a desk study? It also brings me to another issue of different ways of collecting evidence. So you have your consultations, you have your research, you have your interviews, and all that, so that we produce one piece of evidence. So that's the conclusion. We can all read it on our own, in the interest of time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. No questions. I won't be taking questions.
In your dreams. Thank you very much, Florence. Please take a seat.
Thank you.
We want you in the center. You've asked more questions than you have given us answers, but we're going to keep you here because we are clear that you do have the answers within your reach. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. And quite clearly, I think you've missed your day job. You could be a comedian. The way you presented this was wonderful. It really was wonderful. That was a very sobering contribution. Sobering in the sense that it was very clear that this is us. This is us. And there's nothing as painful as holding a mirror to your face. You know, from the questions that you raised about the governments, to the evidence, to the acceptability of who is the source, you know, and the answers lie here in this room. And the reality is, if we don't provide the answers and the guarantees, if not us, who? There's already a hand.
I'm very much impressed by the presenter because she just spoke truth. That is reality-based. Looking at who we are and what it is and why it is. Many times we simply jump to, this is the problem, this is how we're going to solve the problem. And I want to just maybe provide a foundation from where you started. And the foundation is that the African needs to understand that we are living in two realities. One reality is a Eurocentric, Western-based reality, which underpins all our governments, all our education systems, and all our spiritual beliefs. The other reality that we live in is the Afrocentric reality, which is what we are born with, what even if we try to deny it, we live it. And so these two, we don't sit down to think as, how do these two realities impact on what we do to ourselves? And we then want to respond. I'm going to use the word development. Many of us use the word development every day. How many of us can say what that word is in our own indigenous languages? How many politicians actually know what that word really means in your own language? So we are using a secondary language to develop constructs that are actually very relevant and core to our existence. That's the call that was made earlier on, that perhaps it's time that Africa recognizes that our reality is different and our worldview is different. And what has happened is that as Africans, we simply want to do things with the mind, which is the Western reality. But Africans, by their very nature, are spiritual beings. And we do not speak about the spirit in many of our discussions. When you look at arts, for the sake of arts, it's devoid of spirit. African arts speaks of spirit and emotion. There's one part that is not in here, traditional healers. There was one colleague, I think, somewhere there that said he's a healer. When you bring them in here, we will look at them, ridicule them. But they are actually the people that are providing the primary health services to many of our people out there. We look down at our food, but that is the food that sustains many of our people out in the rural areas. Where is the artist to bring this message out to our people, to the politicians, to make things that are relevant to us in our African reality and not to the Eurocentric perceptions that we've been led to believe? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker, please.
Now, my major question is, you were talking about how the government should be funding this research, right? And there's something that you also included, the fact that results are not always given as they are. Like you were giving the example of your 2013 experience whereby you were afraid if the true results were going to be shown. So like right now as we speak, I was a student of media. I tried to do a research on donor funding, on the effect of donor funding on the growth of the film industry in Africa, well, in Zimbabwe particularly, and SADC countries. I couldn't find a producer who wanted to talk to me. I couldn't find a government official who wanted to talk to me because of donor dependency. Before I even started my research, it was obvious I'm going to say that because of donor dependency, we don't have a film industry that is solid. So from you, do you think that they are really ready for this evidence-based approach? Do they want it? Like right now, I am sure many of the artists who are here, they are donor funded. And when you talk about economic, you're saying, okay, guys, goodbye Germany, goodbye France, goodbye Danish embassy. Hello, working for ourselves. Goodbye donor funding. Based on evidence. Do people want that?
Thank you. Next question.
I'm interested in terms of when you're saying evidence. I find that a lot of the times it's the input legitimacy. Like if you have theater plays, you have all your various disciplines of art. But how can we use evidence in terms of the impact? If we're talking about commercialization or humanization, how do we talk about how we feel when we hear music, or like how the output legitimacy? How do we create evidence around that so that we could use that, whether it's success stories, where they just say, I saw the artworks out here and we sold that much, beyond just the commercialized. Obviously, we can quantify the number, but how do we narrate the impact in terms of the output of the art?
Thank you.
You're telling us the stories of our lives. We used to work with the Southern African Theatre Initiative throughout Zimbabwe, the whole Southern Africa. And the same problems that we are facing today is still there. We operate in a very hostile environment. I spoke this morning about the skewed relationship between the arts and the government. It re-emphasizes exactly what I was saying this morning. But your information that you questioned that about the Nigerians, that statistics there is questionable, because what I know of the Nollywood is that they make videos. It's not movies really. It's half of that. It's just bloody CDs they make and sell it, and then they come up with gross GDP things like that. We have to be very careful with these statistics that we get. But anyway, what I wanted to say is the hostility. In Namibia, we still feel like combatants. Sorry, I've got dentures in my mouth. We still feel like combatants because we still have to fight for everything that we deserve as artists in this country. Now, I don't want to smear our government, but that is the truth. She's talking about the information. Some of the information, last year we had a come together of the artists, and the 20 years ago, policy was taken from the shelf and dusted off, and it was dished up to us. And I criticized that because there was no innovation there. So we stand still in Namibia as far as progress with regard to these policies. So we have to be very careful. But thank you very much. You opened up then the can of worms that we know in here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, let's allow Florence to actually respond.
Okay, so I won't be responding to the first speaker because I feel he just gave his comments and it wasn't necessarily a question. The second one, I think there is a bit of confusion there when you were saying when you were talking about. Okay, so the second person talked about development. What does it mean to us? I was talking recently to a friend of mine who is a health promoter, and she was saying to me, "What exactly do you do? What is your job?" I said, I'm a culturalist. I'm a researcher in culture. I said, "So how do you make your money?" I said, "But look, we are doing the same work because you are going to the communities, you are preaching development, you are building blade toilets in communities where you have not educated people about blade toilets. So these people already have their culture. Have you asked yourself a question, for example? You build a blade toilet, you write a lie to the donor that we built 26 toilets and they are currently being used. Does it mean that if you build toilet, there is change? Because people can then decide that they don't want to use the blade toilet because it's such an inconvenience to them. They are so used to the bush and they like it that way. So what is development without culture? Then she started saying, "But we need to work together." I said, "Oh, before you knew it, actually. It's high time that you pay attention to culture before you just start talking about development, because development means something completely different in our societies and in other societies. So you are saying, you were also asking about whether people are ready to criticize donors. The first, I think in my presentation, when I was talking about the funny story that I was telling you about how we smuggled a certain idea into a meeting, it wasn't a war as such. Because if it was a war, we would have been arrested. But we used diplomacy. One thing for sure is that government does not enjoy being criticized. But there are ways of putting across criticism. Let's try to make it constructive. So that the moment I knock, because you want to work with them in the end, at the end of the day. Remember what I was saying, that how do you want to be identified by the government? As extreme civil society enemy in courts, or you want to be civil society and partner, working with the government, right? The issue of donors, I think people are open. In my experience as a researcher for the past 13 years, I've worked as a researcher. I've learned that people are free to express their opinions. It just depends with the methodology. Sometimes you don't need to sit people down and interview them. It's like interviewing a government official now and expect them to criticize the president and say what the president did was very wrong. No, because they know where their bread is buttered. But provide them with shelter and ask them to speak from a mask and see that they will speak. So it just depends with the methodology. If you want people to feel free to speak, you can use a survey, for example, where people don't have to put their name to their opinion, so they can actually explain to you how they are being affected by donor funding. And in my presentation, I didn't say that we don't want donor funding, because that's got nothing to do with evidence. I was saying sometimes it's not easy for the government to just accept evidence. They need to know, for example, what is the agenda of the person who is creating the evidence. Why are they doing this? Is it to embarrass us, or it's to work with us? Surely if I was the government and someone tries to shoot me in the leg, I would react. I would react. So that's exactly what I was explaining towards the end of my presentation, that we need to find creative ways of presenting evidence to the policymaker and convince the policymaker that this evidence is authentic, it's valid, it's from a reliable and correct source. We can use it. So you can still use diplomacy. You tell someone to go to hell and they go there smiling. Then Patrick's question, he was asking about something that I would say the fluid part of culture. When I do M&E in culture, I always find this part to be very fascinating. Because sometimes I'm not able to produce statistics. We were emphasizing statistics, remember, because we were talking about dollars, the dollar sign. So if you are going to the government and you're saying invest in music, because when I listen to music, I feel very good. It's an industry, but when I listen to it, ooh, I'm finished. Then it will be difficult. So I was talking about statistics in a completely different context. That when we are talking business, let's have our numbers. But that's why I underlined commercialization in the beginning. That I'm not saying all culture should be commercialized, but I'm just presenting on commercialization because we are talking industry. But when we talk about culture as a way of life, and we are documenting that, we need to use ways such as storytelling, for example, where you actually interview someone and say, okay, so how did you feel being given a grant by the National Arts Council of South Africa to be able to produce art for art's sake in your community? And they say, we feel great. Then you take that quote as it is. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no other way except to tell the story as it is. That's the way you can, the most effective way of capturing fluidity in culture, the story.
I'd like to add to that. Patrick, you know that in our meeting yesterday, we spoke about that, right? And it also has to do with, let's say people have gone and watched a theater piece. As they leave the theater, we need to be creating some mechanism of capturing the impact that that particular piece has had on them. That's a qualitative approach, and we're not doing it. So we're actually losing out on how we are affecting people through the art form. So as we speak, these are things that we need to be developing going forward.
Yeah, and art as therapy, for example. Someone is not feeling well, they see a dance piece, they are so motivated, they even feel like standing, and suddenly they are feeling much better. How do you capture that? Except by telling the story. Give them an opportunity to tell the story as it is. So qualitative, yeah. Then the hostile environment that he was talking about. Okay, first I want to address the issue that he said that there is no industry in Nigeria. It goes back. In fact, I'm sure that gentleman over there who asked the first question is already mad, is already angry. Because it goes back to the issue of definitions. Are we going to say a movie should be defined by Hollywood? That Hollywood will give us the process, how to make a movie. The Nigerians, this is what they rejected. And believe you me, I don't want to say this, but a close friend of mine, a lawyer, will not go for 3 days without watching a Nigerian movie. And they say it's so close to their reality. They like it so much because it speaks to them. They don't even understand the action, you know, where the protagonist never dies even when they go under the tire. They can't follow that. But when you bring juju, and they're looking at it and they can see a mother-in-law ill-treating a daughter-in-law, then they say, that's closer home. So I'm sure Nigeria, I'm happy to say that Nigeria is making movies the African way, Afrocentrism, and we like it that way.
Thank you. We'll take the next set of questions, please.
So we just published a study on the film industries, especially the Nigerian one and the one in South Africa, and we had this study commissioned 2 years ago. It's a lot of data that was collected. It is really asking questions of what can we learn from the Nigerian film industry, what can we learn from the South African one, what is there that we can learn also for the governments to maybe change in their support system, to maybe do less seed funding in the beginning of film productions, but more investing more in the post-production and the marketing. And I realize now that I should have had the buy-in probably in the beginning before we commissioned this. We had it published now and we had it sent to the various departments in South Africa, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is so important information and they will happily take it. And you know, and now I'm learning from you why they're not responding probably, even though it's such important information. And now I'm like, okay, man, obviously, we have to change the strategy, but it really speaks to the point of there are funding organizations, there are NGOs, there are mediators like us, and we do this work and we do collect all this information, and it's a lot of investment in resources that go into it, but what does it mean if no one picks it up and implements? So yeah, I'm still open to this discussion and to see how we can get that buy-in.
Mine is a question. Because you're talking about evidence-based. The issue of statistics is very key. Issue of numbers is very key. But what is the place of the CDIS methodology for SADC? You made a lot of quotes on UNESCO, but you didn't make any mention to the CDIS methodology that Zimbabwe has actually used and has a published in partnership with Zimstad, which is a government statistics organization, which is 2017, and it was released this year in 2018. Of course, you didn't make mention to it, but what is its place? Because it may actually help a lot of institutions here as a starting point to use those methodologies for us to present cases.
Thanks, Nicholas. Can we then have the two people on the other side and then Florence react?
I just wanted to make a quick observation too, please, Mrs. Mangope. We are also here, so I noticed you hardly look this way. People also want to ask questions here, so if we could just also look this way. I just wanted to address what the gentleman spoke about, Nigerian film industry. I just wanted to say you're wrong. Very, very wrong, because I live there. There are quality movies. It's not just those ones that you see on the street with low quality. Even those low quality ones, it's still art. the camera is just a medium. So whatever the story is, however it's told, really doesn't matter. But then we have cinemas, we have quality movies, we're raking in the numbers in the cinemas. And I also wanted to say the next thing is that from the conversation here, there seems to be an inclination towards, oh, the government, how can the government help? How can we get access to funding? It's time to create value. So how the Nollywood started, how the music industry started, that some of our artists come to Namibia, come to South Africa, pack out stadiums, it was self-starting. The people need to be self-starting. The creative industry is creative. So no more, for example, my company, when I started, I've never accessed one fund from my government. I employ 10 people. I started the next research lab, not one government funding. And I've never gone to ask. So the creative economy in Nigeria just went, did it, and has been really successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very true. Very true. There was another hand on that side as well.
Just a comment from the speaker. This side, when he was speaking about Afrocentric and Eurocentric, you know, when he was saying it's like we are a bit forgetting or deriving from our own culture and all of these things. I'm not really to speak against it or to say he's wrong or to say, but I feel like at the current time as Africans, we are a bit lucky. I like telling my colleagues in class that don't point fingers. Turn the fingers to you. You start your change. Don't point your finger to your next neighbor like, you're rich, I'm poor. Work your ground until it's better. So, to come at this point, what I'm trying to say is that we're lucky that we have both ways. We have the Afrocentric and the Euro. They don't have really our way. You know, but I feel like it's even a blessing if we blend this thing. But if we start just trying to push away the way the Europeans does their things and all of these things, how can we even have the means or the mediums of communicating or all of these things? Let me talk about technology, for example. The way we communicate is because they invented that. I'm not saying we didn't invent anything. There are things that we invent and we should be proud of. So we should also use their ways not to kick out our culture, but even to modify it or to make it much better so it can also be, you know, accommodate us and create something beautiful and stronger for us. So my point is just that let's appreciate everything so we can keep everything and then we can build our Africa in this way.
Thank you very much. Okay, I am actually going to curtail discussions, hate me, love me. But unfortunately, I do have to actually have the proceedings run. So Florence, please wrap up.
Thank you for saving me. You're getting a drink for this. Okay, so I'll start by responding to the issue of government. Yes, we are not just saying government should give us funding. And I am still convinced that the government has to work with us. Because there are many things that relate directly to the government. They can give us money, or they may not give us money, but at least they should create an operational environment that is favorable so that we are able, if you don't give us money, they don't stop us. Because in some cases, you find that there are rampant cases of censorship, for example. Artists are not free to create because the government will come and arrest you. They have not given you money, believe me, and you want to be as creative as you can be, but they will stop you. So if it's not money, there are still ways that they should work on to encourage creativity. And in any case, why shouldn't they give us money if they are giving money to mainstream industry? They get loans from the banks. If we try to access those loans as artists, we don't have collateral. Exactly what the Vice President was talking about last night, the issue of collateral. So yeah, government, and we will always go to you as government. And the last issue was on CDIS methodology. Thank you very much, Nicholas. I've been having a discussion with Damir. around the CDIS methodology. What happened in Zimbabwe, you will agree with me, it was a lot of hard work. Commitment both from the government and from UNESCO. To say, the government approaching UNESCO and saying, let's work together so that you assist us in implementing this, so that we start generating our own statistics in Zimbabwe. And I think what I can say to the rest of us is that it's not very easy to just start implementing those things. But UNESCO does have a facility. I'm not sure if they are currently working. Jenny and Avril can explain on that. But they used to have a facility under the 2005 convention where you would apply as a government to get an expert, a whole expert for yourself, to come and assist you, in coming up with the methodology, implementing it, and how to generate statistics. So some of these things, they actually require expertise, not even the type of expertise that I can give, but from the statisticians and the actual experts in the generation of cultural statistics to assist you. But thank you for bringing that up. I'm sure there are quite a number of government representatives here. You are free to approach UNESCO to say we need assistance with that so that we start generating our own statistics. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, much appreciated. A round of applause. Take a bow, actually. You're on stage, you have to take a bow. Thank you very much.